Last week, the massively popular comedy improv brand Smosh celebrated 20 years on YouTube. It's maybe the platform's longest running successful channel, and many would argue is currently in its golden era. But it all could have turned out so differently. In this video, we're going to look at how Smosh rose from the dead, why its content works so well, and what it tells us about the changing nature of comedy on the internet. Smosh was started by two school friends from Sacramento, California, Ian Hecox and Anthony Padilla, best friends since 6th grade science class. In 2002, age 15, Padilla made the website smosh.com to host some homemade flash animations and give him something to do while sick in bed. 3 years later, he paired up with Hecox, and the two guys started making goofy comedy videos together, uploading them to the site and to MySpace. These are pretty primitive, kind of teenage stuff, usually just like lip syncing to theme songs from games and TV shows, and just kind of being dorks and nerds. In November 19th, 2005, they started their YouTube channel, back when this site was basically just an infant learning how to see shapes and colors. And a week later, they uploaded what would become their first mega hit, a lip sync music video for the Pokemon TV show theme song. This would eventually get like around 24 million views and was briefly the most viewed video on the site. Even I remember seeing it back in the day when me and my mates would crowd around the dial-up and watch garbage like E-Bombs World. And over the next few years, Smosh would dominate YouTube, pulling in tens of millions of views and occupying the most watched video slot multiple times. Of course, back then there was just not very many channels on YouTube. As success grew, Smosh started professionalizing, hiring a manager, getting monetized, but it was still just a couple of guys in their early 20s dealing for the first time with massive fame and success, navigating a still young medium where the norms for earning money, managing audiences, etc., hadn't yet been formed. So they did what many young creatives would do in their situation. They handed things over to the adults. In 2011, Padilla and Hecox sold Smosh to a media and entertainment conglomerate named Alloy Digital. Founded in 1996 as a holding company for the teen magazine and website Alloy, by 2011, the company had purchased a bunch of online entertainment properties under the umbrella of Alloy Digital, including popular video games and movie sites like The Escapist, Screen Junkies, and Game Trailers. This was a pretty flush period, I think, looking back, for online entertainment content, and the capitalists wanted to get their beaks in. So the story of Smosh under Alloy Digital, which rebranded as Defy Media in 2013, was a classic story of plucky indie artists who hand over the keys to bureaucrats who don't really understand art or creativity or building an audience. With the cash infusion, Smosh was able to move into a production studio, take on a real crew, and hire performers who would prove integral to the brand's growth, many of whom still work for or with the company a decade later and have become much loved YouTube stars in their own right. Additional YouTube channels were also developed, including Smosh Games and Smosh Pit, which would eventually grow into the company's bread and butter, and even right now massively outperform the main channel. But the sale to Defy Media was a poison chalice. Smosh was just one line entry in Defy's portfolio of media properties, and they seemed to treat it as a brand from which they could simply extract as much value as possible. So there was a Smosh animation channel, there was a Smosh movie, Smosh magazine, a sketch show, an online sitcom. There was a lot of stuff and probably not much creative direction. People didn't really know how to market YouTube or what YouTube audiences really were, so there was a kind of childish, wacky, cartoony quality to a lot of the content, as Defy seemed to be going for the same kind of demographic as like Nickelodeon or the Disney Channel. But the biggest problem was by handing over control to other people, Hecox and Padilla were frozen out of the whole creative decision-making process and were essentially reduced to employees in the thing that they helped create. Over time, tensions and resentments brewed, and something had to give. And eventually it did.
I'm leaving Smosh.
What?
Padilla ended up leaving the company, breaking the central partnership at its core. Hecox would stay on to sort of keep the ship going, and the two friends would not speak to each other for years. Then things got worse. When we get to 2018, the spring and summer, Defy start selling off different properties. They do layoffs. They get sued for unpaid advertisement fees. And then, November 6th, 2018, total disaster. Out of the blue, one day, Defy Media announced that they are going out of business, that all employees of all media properties are now out of a job.
Smosh is homeless.
Super homeless. Yeah.
So our parent company went out of business, and Smosh is currently without a home.
Later, people who worked for the company would claim financial mismanagement, theft of money from creators, with the company's former head of audience development branding it essentially a Ponzi scheme. And it turned out, Hecox and Padilla had sold Smosh to Defy not for money, but for stock, which was now, of course, worthless. They had handed over their precious brand to a bunch of suits. They had lost control of the thing that gave them all their success, and they had both lost their best friend. All in the end, for nothing. Then, a lifeline. YouTube's other wholesome OG duo, Rhett and Link from Good Mythical Morning, stepped in, bought Smosh,
What?
put Ian back in charge, and gave it a home in their Mythical Entertainment studios. A core cast and crew stayed on, some formats were dropped, new ones were developed. Smosh Pit and Smosh Games continued to grow, important new permanent cast members came on board, and the brand started to really thrive. They weren't getting the crazy views that they might have done back in the day, but they were building quality content and a receptive, appreciative audience. Then, in June 2023, the twist.
So, today, Anthony and I can say officially that we
Own Smosh.
Yeah.
This shit's
baby.
ours.
It's ours. We bought it.
I got the password.
Yeah. We own Smosh now.
What?
After years in exile, Padilla was back. The two friends had mended their friendship and bought their company back from Mythical. 12 years after they had given up control of the channel, it was now back under their name. The return of Padilla was accompanied by a promise that Smosh would get back to the old style of content. But that ended up not really happening, and for pretty good reason. Over the years, the company, especially with Smosh Pit and Smosh Games, had developed really high quality content, had allowed their performers to develop and flourish in ways that meant that Hecox and Padilla were not so much needed. The tastes of the internet had changed. Sketches and parodies had fallen out of vogue. The semi-structured, semi-improv content that Smosh was now excelling at was much closer to what people really wanted. The Smosh channels continue to get very good numbers. Its performers are beloved by the audience. It produces fun, innovative content almost every day of the week and is comforting and joyous and light in a way that so much of the internet isn't. A rare example of how being good, being patient, and being lucky pays off in the long run. But why is the content so good, and what does it tell us about how comedy on the internet currently works? Let's get into it. So, why does Smosh content work so well? I think one thing the Smosh people understand is that right now, comedy isn't really about jokes. It's not even really about being funny. In fact, I think there's something in the culture where trying to be funny through like jokes and sketches feels maybe a little bit cringe.
I said to my girlfriend, I said, you shouldn't eat before you go swimming. She said, why? I said, you look fat.
Comedy content is actually mostly, I think, about vibes and atmosphere. And I think these tastes, the appetite for certain kinds of vibes, are changing and have been changing because of cultural and aesthetic and in subtle and not so subtle ways, political reasons too. If you've been online at all the past 5 or 10 years or so, you know that comedy online has been dominated by, and in some ways kind of synonymous with, the comedian podcast. But the era of the comedian podcast is coming to an end. Even though a lot of these shows still attract big numbers, their cultural relevance is fading, their audiences are turning on them, they're embroiled in scandals. Politically, they're being forced to reckon with the kinds of things that they have helped happen in the world. So you've probably seen these comedians, these podcasts, usually dudes in their 30s or 40s, sitting in small studios, talking into microphones, usually based in Los Angeles or recently Austin. And these guys all seem to kind of know each other and talk about each other or appear on each other's shows. And for a while there earlier, there was at least the kind of aesthetic of like countercultural or grunge or underground to some of this stuff. I mean, those early Rogan years, for example, had like a bit of an edge. The atmosphere, the feeling was of losers and weirdos and eccentrics just sitting around in Rogan's basement, smoking pot, talking shit. And you know, if you're a 25-year-old dude watching this, it's pretty attractive. You kind of want to be there in the room. But over time, the whole podcast thing got too big. These guys couldn't sustain quality, people got too rich, the product got lazy, the lines between politics and media started collapsing, and a lot of these guys actively helped ruin the world. Some of them turned out to be weirdos and sex pests. Basically, the vibes were off. In fact, right now, the most entertaining aspect to the whole comedy podcast scene online is actually the haters and critics who document the downfall and collapse and drama of these guys. There's a whole cottage industry on YouTube of commentary around the comedy scene. And yeah, a lot of it is kind of sloppy and parasitic, but some of it's really high quality, like things like Red Bar Radio, which is a kind of mad old style radio show that totally takes these guys apart, or Elephant Graveyard on YouTube, who makes these dreamy, brutal takedowns of Rogan and the rest of the comedy scene, bringing in massive numbers and making these amazing Adam Curtis style documentaries, really. And I used to really like a lot of this stuff, and now I don't really tune in. If I do, I see middle-aged men talking about Rolexes and vaccines and cancel culture, and I think, all right, when does the comedy start? Basically, these guys don't look like they're having fun. And set against this, we have the rise of like more, I would say, queer-coded, slightly alternate, high-energy, random comedy that really does feel fun. When I watch Smosh or videos like this, they seem like they're having a great time, and I want to be there in the room with them having a great time. Second, online comedy content is about vibes, but it's also about moments. And this is true for online content in general. I mean, real life is so stale and predictable that when we go online, what we want is something real, like moments that are real. We don't like fakeness. We want to see people in the moment reacting and creating something surprising. And one thing Smosh is really good at is creating environments in which moments are likely to happen. So if we compare it to like a traditional comedy podcast, you know, these are usually just two or more guys sitting, talking in this sort of unstructured, long form way. And there's a lot of filler, there's not much incentive or prompts for interesting things to kind of happen during recording. But Smosh has got all sorts of formats. The performers they have are naturally funny, they're able to improv, they have real personalities, they emote, and the producers put them in formats and situations heighten all of this. So they do all sorts. They dress up, they do improv, they play board games and card games together. They play Resident Evil, Rollercoaster Tycoon. They do little game shows. They act out each other's middle school diaries. They play pranks on each other. They do roasts. They make up characters. There's this density of comedy which kind of charges the atmosphere and just makes interesting things happen. I think especially good is the Smosh Games channel, where the cast play card games and board games together, because these games come with their own structure. They create tension and conflict and escalation and almost no like filler time. They also have great camera work and editing and sound too. I've wasted probably hundreds of hours just watching strangers play games together. And the fact that Smosh is so geared towards these moments means it's also extremely clippable and compilatable. There are all these little moments that if I tried to explain them to someone else, they just wouldn't seem funny. But because I know the performers and because I was there watching the video when it happened, to me, it's great. Okay, last one. Comedy as aspiration / politics with a lowercase p. So, unfortunately, it has become very difficult to talk about comedy on the internet without talking about politics. And this is mainly the fault of the comedians, who have, in ways intended or unintended, benefited from or participated in the various cultural shifts over the past few years that have made the world objectively worse. There is a feeling with a lot of these guys of chickens coming home to roost, where we're seeing podcasters having to reckon with or avoid or dismiss the damage that they have helped do. And yeah, this is partly about platforming or endorsing certain people or certain points of view, but more than those specifics, it's also about, again, vibes, like a way of feeling about things, a way of approaching the world. Looking back, the atmosphere of these podcasts feels kind of cynical. It feels self-absorbed, hostile towards people who are too sensitive, people who can't take a joke. And a lot of people are over this. I think that a lot of people now want sincerity. They want some more idealism. They want ways of being in the world that are more open, that are lighter. They want to see examples of togetherness, of friendship. I think that the comedy of Smosh is in some ways a comedy of inclusivity. And I don't mean this just in terms of like representation or DEI or something. What I mean is a comedy of literally including others, like being generous in the moment with jokes and bits, being genuinely affectionate with other people, and creating a mood and an atmosphere where everyone is welcome and everyone is contributing. In some ways, for its audience, I think Smosh represents a kind of workplace fantasy. The wish that we could earn money by having a good time with people who we like and love. And the brand shares some of this kind of aspirational workplace idealism with something like Dropout, which has a lot of audience and performer crossover. This is a media company from Sam Reich, who used to work for College Humor, which puts its progressive or generous philosophy into material terms, operating as a profit share in which all employees and contributors, from the cleaners to the top talent, share financial stakes in the company's success. Now, Smosh doesn't have quite the same level of explicit socialist structure, but the spirit of the comedy offers, I think, an alternative to the very individual figure of the comedian that we've been living with for so long. A lot of these guys like to see themselves as lone truth tellers, tortured artists, just a guy on a stage with a microphone, the only one brave enough to say the R word. But when I watch Smosh, I see a different mode of creativity in which things are made and made funny through a kind of collective feeling, where everyone is together building something in the moment, where art and comedy comes from environments in which people feel safe and light and connected to the people around them, where you don't just make things and then also have friendship, you make things through friendship.